Hello Popcorn Junkies, welcome to a movie review with spoilers included of Zendaya's new film, Challengers. I'm not a passenger. Why do I keep wanting to say, I'm not a passenger, I'm not a challenger? Isn't there a song with Challenger in the title? I'm sure there is. This is the new film from Luca Guadagnino. Luca Guadagnino. He Who Brought Us, Call Me By Your Name, Suspiria, Bones and All, A Bigger Splash. I didn't see A Bigger Splash, but I heard good things about it. He's worked with Tilda Swinton a lot. He's worked with Timothy Chalamet quite a bit. The last film I saw by him was Bones and All, which was the kind of cannibal road movie. And I thought there were parts of that. I was pleasantly surprised. I kind of enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. I also enjoyed his take on the Dario Argento classic Suspiria. I quite enjoyed that too, though a lot of people didn't. And weirdly, Call Me By Your Name didn't float my boat. I mean, even the scene with the peach just didn't do it for me. Didn't do it for me. It was sort of, it felt like a film. I mean, he's got a European sensibility, and he cites numerous sort of European directors as his kind of inspiration, whether it be, is it Rainer Werner Fassbinder, Bernardo Bertolucci, yeah, these kind of filmmakers. Anyway, so this is called Challengers. This is the film starring Zendaya. It also stars Josh O'Connor, he of The Crown fame. And it has Mike Faist, who you'll know from, well, I only got to know from West Side Story. And as I say, he does romance old Luca Guadagnino, but he does romance in a troubling and difficult way. What's your take on Zendaya, guys? I mean, there's a school of thought that doesn't think her range is particularly vast. You know, she, in Euphoria, in which she came to fame, she had to play a sort of slightly underplaying, you know, monosyllabic teenage youth type. She's in Spider-Man, obviously she plays Spider-Man, Tom Holland's girlfriend. They're not particularly challenging parts insofar as you don't get to see a huge range of different performative skills. And so coming into this film, it's going to be curious to see her in a sort of resolutely grown-up role, where she is effectively playing a 30-something mother at the heart, if you like, the fulcrum. I love the word fulcrum, like as in a seesaw, but the fulcrum at the heart of a bizarre love triangle. And that's what this film is. This is a bizarre love triangle film set within the world of tennis. Let's talk about tennis. I mean, there's been many films made about tennis or around tennis. I don't find it a particularly cinematic sport. I don't find it a sport that has a sort of cinematic edge to it. I mean, you know, most American sports like baseball or American football or hockey or even soccer, there's a kind of aspect to it that's kind of cool and kind of, I don't know, cinematic. But for me, tennis doesn't have that, and it's kind of weird because it kind of should. There's lots of great shots, there's lots of fast play, fast balls, a neat court, you know, all that kind of stuff. For me, it feels like a very privileged sport. This is almost like, this could have been a film that was set in the world of skiing. What is it about? It's about this bizarre love triangle. It's about two boys or blokes. They start off as young sort of adolescents who went to college together, boarded together, taught each other how to masturbate together, which was a kind of curious detail that they offered us up. And that's Josh O'Connor and Mike Faist. They're two buddies. They're a doubles team, junior doubles team, and they stumble across or come across Zendaya, who's this progeny. She's this beautiful, talented, #1 hitting global sensation who's got all sorts of kind of, you know, ad deals, and she's the big I am. But she's young and she's performing, and they're winning their kind of doubles kind of championship, and their paths cross and they try to hit on her. And I have to say, I think if there was one part of this film which I thought was its more successful sort of section, or the most successful part of the timeline that it would return to, it was in these earlier stages where you had a sense of the younger Josh O'Connor and the younger Mike Faist, full of, you know, vim and vigour and enthusiasm and wanting to court and pull Zendaya. I mean, it's not lost on you, the idea of these two hapless individuals trying to woo this absolutely stunning, beautiful, talented woman. And I think in there is a bit of a problem with the entire concept of this one, because I didn't buy into the idea that Zendaya would have been interested in either one of these guys from the get-go for a minute. So in terms of the structure of this film, so this is about how the three of them meet. It's about how Zendaya hooks up with one of them, but has a fling with both of them, hooks up with the other one across time, and then sets about kind of pitting them against each other or getting the best out of them. I mean, even when they kind of woo her, and we'll get to the kind of threesome scene, or the threesome scene that never happens, she kind of manages to pull the best performance out of both these guys as tennis players through the offer or the suggestion that she will, you know, marry them, be with them, love them, have sex with them, or whatever, or go on a date with them. So she's luring them. So she's evil, she's manipulative, she's Machiavellian, Zendaya. So this is a very different role for her. She's not a likeable character. She's cold, she's icy, all that sort of stuff. Everything takes a kind of troubling turn when Zendaya has the most awful accident whilst playing tennis, and I'm now beginning to wonder whether the fact that I had to look away at the moment that her leg snapped was prefigured the fact that I've now injured my right knee really badly and I'm limping around like an absolute, you know, sado. And because I literally couldn't look at it. Was it a preordained kind of vision? So she wrecks her leg, and then what happens is, this is really a film about how Zendaya then starts to kind of, well, she gets into a relationship with the Mike Faist character, who, interestingly, you sort of feel is less well suited to her. He's more of a sort of straight Mike Faist, whereas Josh O'Connor, it's been clearly indicated to us that he breaks the rules, he smokes, he swears, he's informal, he's kind of more of a lad than Mike Faist. He's the one who introduced Mike Faist or told him how to wank. And so, you know, you feel, I was kind of drawn to Josh O'Connor. He was like the sort of John McEnroe of the two, whereas it felt like Mike Faist was more, I don't know, sort of is it Tim Henman? Is that his name? Is his name Tim Henman? I think one of the other problems I have with tennis is so many tennis personalities now are so fucking boring. And so there is an element in this that the characters are a little bit one-dimensional. Anyway, so Zendaya snaps her leg, and then she becomes the trainer of Mike Faist, and so suddenly she's got a vested interest in him performing well, and he's doing all right, he's not doing brilliantly, and then he enters this competition, and a wild card entry is Josh O'Connor, and then suddenly they're going to come face to face in a big match. And so the whole film, the shape of the film, if you like, the flashbacks, the zipping up the timeline, the zipping back in time, the zipping back to now, the going to Atlanta in a windy city, zips all over the place with lots of sort of straps and titles on the screen saying, oh, 6 years later, 10 years later, 4 years earlier, 310, you know, and it goes on and on and on. But what we keep returning to is the nowness of this game, or this tennis match between our two male leads. All the while, Zendaya sat perfectly, you know, in the middle, equidistant to both players, looking down the line of the net, watching. I was kind of watching so many of the scenes where everyone would watch the ball, and I was thinking, they're not really watching a ball, and it doesn't look like they're watching a ball, because every now and then you need one of those, but there weren't any. It was just like, anyway, so it quickly becomes apparent that this Machiavellian, you know, Zendaya isn't a nice character, and there's a moment where Mike Faist, I felt for Mike Faist, I want to give Mike Faist a little bit of a cuddle, actually. It's in the trailer where he says, I love you, and she says, I know you do. If anyone you're with in a relationship only says, I know you do, it's a great big klaxon sound, foghorn sound of get out. And so there was a coldness and a callousness to Zendaya's character, which would have been and could have been, I felt, intriguing to watch, you know, in the hands of Zendaya. But it never went anywhere. It kind of felt very surface. There wasn't really any depth to it. I didn't feel that in other scenes we got other moments where we felt her sort of scheming in a more obvious sense, or her surviving, or I wanted more about what was making her tick. I mean, you know, and she, you know, there's a great moment where their 5-year-old child, hers and Mike Faist, because they've got married and moved on and all that, they talk about the Spider-Verse, and you're thinking, I wonder if anyone in the room knows that Zendaya's really in Spider-Man. Of course they do. A little bit like the film, we have to zip up and down the timeline. So let's go back to that moment. It's a moment that's in the trailer where the two of them are on the bed, they're in the hotel room. I thought this was one of the most successful scenes, actually, up until, I have to say, up until the point where Zendaya, in a rather cringy fashion, sits on the bed, taps the bed, and they both leap up and sit either side of her. This was the point in the trailer where I was like, oh God, what is this? What is this from? Weird. And so a three-way kiss develops. Now, loath am I to suggest that really Zendaya's ever going to sign up to a film where she gets all her kit off and has an actual threesome. But this film, I'm going to say it because it needs to be said. This film kept nibbling at the edges of real sauce and real sex and real suggestiveness and real kind of threesome thruppleness and all this kind of stuff. And it felt it wanted to go there, but it didn't have the courage of its convictions. What this film was in dire need of was a really rampant threesome, full on, proper, with all the complications that could come from that. And I think in the hands of a French filmmaker or someone like that, it would have happened. It would have got mucky, it would have got tricky. And whilst there was muck and trickiness around this, all the muckiness and trickiness between Josh O'Connor's character and Mike Feist's character really was only kind of felt when they were on the pitch, or on the court rather than actually in their lives. I mean, yeah, there are moments between them where it's a bit challenging and all that kind of stuff, but not really. And I think this film suffers and struggles with a curious attitude to Zendaya. This idea that she's the sort of who's had sex with her, and if I serve in this way by holding the ball here, I'm sending you a signal that I slept with her the night before, which is a crucial detail. That's a huge spoiler point there. But it felt that was very Dulwich College. It was a very Dulwich, if I hold the tennis ball just between the racket and my thumb and I go to serve, what I'm telling you is I had sex with Zendaya. And it was odd. It was kind of not very deep. I think one of the most interesting aspects of this film was it was forever wondering and guessing and exploring, and I could have done with a bit more exploring, of the gay love or the homosexual love or the attraction between Josh O'Connor and Mike Feist. It's clearly indicated because within the threesome kiss, Zendaya extrapolates herself from it at one point. I mean, a threesome kiss is a curious thing, isn't it? You can only put your tongue in one mouth at one time, and so what do? Do you end up doing this? You sort of like trying to hit, and it becomes like a volley. It was like a tongue volley. It was like it was like a racket match in the mouth, and they were tongue volleying, and then there was a forehand smash, and then a backhander, all this kind of stuff. But what happened was Zendaya pulled back, and it was the two guys really snogging, licking, and kissing. And that was kind of the most interesting thing. But what I think this film was in desperate need of some proper, I hate to use an old-fashioned word, but nookie. It needed some nookie. I mean, Zendaya says at one point she doesn't want to be a home wrecker. And then the whole film really is a power struggle across time at different places. She goes and has sex with Josh O'Connor in a car at one point, at the windiest Atlanta. I couldn't work out whether the director said it needs to be windy for melodrama, or whether they were just shooting in Atlanta and it happened to be windy. It was one of those ones where it was like, oh yeah, which came first, the wind or the racket? You know, I could tell that the film was trying to nudge us towards this idea that at the point that Mike Feist has had enough, he's kind of like, he's not winning. He said, you know what, I want to give up tennis. But Josh O'Connor said, I think I've got one more championship in me. I think I could go the whole journey, even though he's sleeping in a car. He's got no money to even afford half a burger, and he's got no prospects whatsoever. But suddenly he could now really, he thinks, get a route to, you know, the Grand Slam. And he tries to woo Zendaya in an alleyway and sort of says, yeah, come on, why don't you look after me? Why don't you manage me? And you can see Zendaya's kind of like Machiavellian sort of brain going, well, if my husband stops, then maybe I could manage. And yeah, it was all a bit obvious, that sort of melodrama. The weird thing about this film was there was enough there for it to become quite a nuanced, interesting exploration of power, control, especially given the fact that actually she was a woman trainer and she was pulling the strings on these two men. It was quite refreshing to have two men being a bit sort of divvy and kind of, idolatory of Zendaya. So in the end, I was sort of sitting there watching this film, and a lot of the film is doing this. That's not just with the ball, but it's also with Zendaya's tongue and Josh O'Connor's tongue and then Mike Feist's tongue. That one scene is about as sexy as it gets, although actually there is one other scene where Zendaya and Josh O'Connor have a scene. Apparently it's very well known throughout the film. It's referenced Josh O'Connor has the biggest penis in tennis. That could account for something. There are some pretty straightforward observations, like having a big dick means that you're desirable. I couldn't help at times but feel that this whole film was a sort of strange 50-something director's fantasy or daydream or wet dream with zero follow-through. It's like he wanted to kind of immortalise a bit of an erotic kind of dream, but then couldn't follow through, quite literally, in the form of he couldn't serve an ace. Sorry, there's so many opportunities for tennis analogies here. So there was no really truly titillating aspect to the whole thing. There was no really, it wasn't erotic. It wasn't, I mean, the most suggestive and the most potentially exciting moment in that sense, because, and the reason that's important is it's a film about love. And also tonally, I don't think the film knows if it was a comedy. It kind of had comedic aspects to it, but it didn't have the courage of its convictions, and there was a lightness to the sort of performances. I mean, Josh O'Connor and Mike Feist were quite sort of breezy. Of all the actors, I think the one actor I was most impressed with, or I found the most watchable, and that's not even based on making a preordained judgment, it's just watching it. I was like, oh, I'm enjoying, was Josh O'Connor. I found Josh O'Connor really embedded in this character, and I really bought into him, and I really believed him, and I kind of much preferred him to Mike Feist, though I felt sorry for Mike Feist's character by the end. So the camera in this is trying to sex things up, because you can't sex it up. They don't have sex. You don't see any of it, you don't get any of it, and so it's just like, oh, lots of people in tennis shorts And I don't know about you, I mean, I don't know if it's a particular thing for particular, I don't find tennis shorts sexy or the legs in them sexy or anything like that. So in the end, I found all of these three characters, although Josh O'Connor was eminently the most watchable, that was probably because he was the most roguish, he was more of a sort of unpredictable cad. I mean, for example, he had a great moment where he finds a date on Hinge, is it? Or Cringe? Or what was it? It's Cringe, is it? Was it? Tinder or whatever it is. And it was so obviously played that he was ignoring her and looking at Zendaya. Some of the coverage in some of the scenes was really obvious. There's a moment where Mike Faist is standing in the reception area of the hotel at a point where Josh O'Connor has a fling with Zendaya, and he sees them sat at the table, and then he literally looks away and then looks back and they've gone. Now, scenes like that, this is an interesting challenge when you're watching films and reviewing films and responding to films. That looked badly covered in both story, script, camera and performance, because it was unbelievable. But then you end up thinking, well, would Luca Guadagnino say, oh, this was kind of magic realism? It wasn't meant to be real. Of course, they couldn't have upped and left and paid their bill and got out in the space of a nanosecond edit. So is this really telling us that Mike Faist just was all right with it, was going to let it go? And perhaps a more sophisticated reading, though I don't actually feel that the film encourages you to this place, is to see actually the body and the personality of Zendaya as the court, if you like, on which, or against which these two men's love plays. And yeah, I mean, great, that's an analogy. So they're playing ping pong, they're playing tongue tennis over Zendaya and on Zendaya with each other, and really Zendaya is the court and they are the two courting each other over the court. You can get into all of that stuff, but the film, that's us taking it there. The film doesn't do that for you. In many ways, I just felt, by and large, this was a bit of a directorial indulgence. Zendaya, I felt, interestingly, with this film, I'm a fan of Zendaya, but with Dune Part 2, with less so Euphoria, there was something else she was in with John David Washington where they play two actors. I felt very keenly for the first time, I hate to say it, the limits of what I think Zendaya can do. And I think she had a part here that could have allowed her to do a lot more. She wasn't helped by a really toe-curlingly obvious and simple script. It was risible at times. I thought the transitional sequences were bad. This kind of zipping up and down and flashback and flash forward. There's a kind of European zeal and zest to the way in which he edits, and that was something I did quite like in something like Suspiria and Bones and All. There's a kind of not non-narrative, but there's a kind of slightly experimental jump cuttiness to him, which I don't mind that, but it didn't work for me in this. It didn't work for me in this at all. We even had, as I said earlier, the camera was really working overtime to try and make tennis cool. You had shots from the umpire's point of view, zipping along the kind of, the tennis net at the middle, kind of finding Zendaya perfectly sat between the two, both sides of the net. You had lots of kind of montages of, in training or on the court, of balls being hit at the camera. There were a couple of moments there. This was in IMAX, so I had to duck. And I really hurt my knee just doing that. You kind of, wow, and it's a good cracking, thwacking sound. So full credit to the sound department. But then we had, get this, I've never seen it before, we had a sequence where essentially the camera becomes the ball, which is a great idea. I'm a huge fan of attaching GoPros, even something we're making at the moment where we're using a lot of GoPro action to emulate being some other piece of kit. But okay, so let's be a tennis ball. Let's be a tennis ball that's being hit. And the idea of that's fantastic. And you think, yeah, this is going to be zippy, it's going to be fast, it's going to be disorientating. And it was all those things. But the problem with being a tennis ball, visually and thematically, is as you're flying around as a tennis ball, because you're round and because you bounce, you can't see anything. So it all becomes a jumble. So in a sense, you don't really see very much. And so the very effect of kind of disorientation just becomes a sort of a device rather than anything that added to the disorientation of the story or the thematics of the story. A couple of choices that I found Luca Guadagnino made, which just didn't work for me. He might sit there on set or in the edit and go, this is European, this is Rainer Werner Fassbinder, this is what we do, we just break the rules. He'd have really kind of, normal kind of shot, reverse shot, intimate, scripted scenes. For example, I thought one of the stronger scenes in it was Josh O'Connor and Zendaya in, I think, was it his room? Essentially they're kind of splitting up. They almost have sex. She tells him he's got a big dick. and they fall out. It's a moment of falling outness, which I was striving to hear it, because what Luca Guadagnino did, the director did throughout this film, was there'd be moments like that. And I love counterpoints. I love doing stuff that was abrasive, like the opening of Anatomy of a Fall, really loud music getting in the way of what's going on. But there was a point to it, because the loud music is part of the plot in that film. Well, in this, he would put in high energy dance music. I was almost expecting New Order's Blue Monday, or I don't know, the oh God, what's the name of the Communards or something like that. I thought that it felt like that was playing, but it would come in so loud over the top of a dialogue scene that you're just like, oh, for fuck's sake, mate, you're just doing this for the sake of it. You're just in the edit going, chuck it in there. And if anyone complains, it's European. It's not European. It was stupid and it was annoying. So the end of the film, ridiculous. You know, what? On the court? And so you've got a classic kind of, oh, they're fighting for their relationship. They're fighting for their survival. Who's going to be with Zendaya? Who wants to be with Zendaya? She was highly unattractive, highly undesirable. And I didn't believe they were desirable either, so no one was really desirable. And I think if you're doing a film about a bizarre love triangle, or a love triangle of any sort, you've got to be invested in the desire of them all. And I was kind of even hoping that I would believe in the desire between the two boys. And I think actually of the many different configurations that there could have been, I think the most believable of all of them was perhaps whatever there was between Mike Faist and Josh O'Connor. So all in all, I have to say, I think this was possibly one of the strangest films I've seen in a long time. It kept me sat there. I mean, did I care? I not really care. I was kind of mouth open, thinking, tennis is boring. People who play tennis are boring. Sorry for any tennis fans out there. We know lots of people play tennis and they're not boring, but it's my feeling. It never used to be. And I just thought, well, the world is a bit boring, and tennis balls are a bit boring, unless Toffee's chasing them. And I just thought, well, this isn't really doing it for me. And so it just didn't do it for me. And, you know, lots of people are loving this, saying it's a really complex, clever drama, sort of romantic comedy. So if I was to score this, I was underwhelmed. I'd probably have to give this 45. Odd choices by everyone in this. Odd.